Good. All right. So, okay, so you've read the three passages. Okay, so you're probably starting to think about it. I'll go over all of them slowly and we'll discuss them together. But I want to give you a little bit the outline, what I'm going to do, how I'm going to look at this. So first of all, we will look at the biblical blueprint. It's often quoted in the arguments against homosexuality. Then we'll look at biblical law. And then the biblical principles of exclusion or excommunication. Okay, so that's the outline. We're going to look at all of these aspects that are in the discourse today. So the blueprint, what's the blueprint? We studied it. What's the blueprint for gender relations according to the biblical text that we studied together? What is it?
Like the norm?
Yeah, according to the biblical text, right? What is supposed to be the ideal relationship? Yeah.
Man and woman.
Man and woman, right? It's you see the creation story, Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, right? As some people say, right? So we have it seems like a very clear blueprint. This is the ideal we ought to aspire to. Why? To have children, right? To enrich the earth with life, right? This is a life-giving union, fruitful union. Therefore, that's the blueprint. Now, is blueprint a law? No, right? So we have to be careful, right? If there is a blueprint, doesn't necessarily mean that if you don't do it, you're sinning, right? So that's the first thing we have to be careful with, right? Because there's in the discourse, there's the idea, oh, that's the ideal, therefore all of us have to do it. Now, what's interesting is that when you look at the biblical text, you see a number of alternative lifestyles, right? You see a lot of stories that go against the blueprint, right? In other words, can anyone tell me what are some of these stories which do not follow the blueprint? Man, woman, in the stories, in biblical stories that don't follow this paradigm of woman, man, children, right? That's the triangle, right? That is the blueprint. What are some stories which you feel are outside of the norm? Can you remember any? And stories that are celebrated, right? Lives that are celebrated in the text and yet do not fit the norm. So yeah.
I don't remember specific names, but I remember reading about a woman who couldn't conceive. And she was like alone.
Alone.
Okay.
Was she alone? If she couldn't conceive, she was with someone, no? Because
I just know it mentioned that like she couldn't conceive.
okay, so definitely we have the notion of barrenness, right? But it's sadly in the Bible, it's always overturned. The woman eventually conceives. So she's kind of brought back into the paradigm, unless you can find me. The ones I'm remembering.
Abram Sarai.
Sarah, she conceives eventually, right? The text is bringing it back to the paradigm. Barren women usually re-enter the paradigm through the intervention of God. But I'm looking at stories that come out of the paradigm and yet are celebrated. So if you've read, so Genesis, not so much, right? So you have to look more into the book of Judges, let's see, even Exodus, Judges, New Testament has a lot. So if you're not in the New Testament, if you're Christian, you should have already some inkling of what Jesus says about marriage, what Paul says about marriage. How are they subverting the blueprint? Anybody see it? Yeah.
I mean, I don't know the New Testament very well, but my idea is going to like the Virgin Mary. Like, I don't know if it ever talks about her being married, but she had, this birth without a husband and
Good. We'll get to that. So the New Testament subverts the categories are very strongly, but even before. Okay, how many of you know the story of Deborah? Deborah, okay, I'll tell you the story. So Deborah she's married, of course, but she becomes a judge. She becomes a leader, a very powerful military leader in Israel, right? And she is approached by the military leader of the time, a man, who asks her, come with me to war. I can't do it by myself, right? And she goes with him to war and she defeats the enemies, right? And she's called a mother in Israel. It's very interesting. So look at this woman, right? She's married, yes, but she's a military leader. There's no mention of her children, right? She is rather seen as a mother in Israel. How does that begin to subvert the blueprint? How is this figure, which is celebrated, right? in the text, how does she not fit in the blueprint? Yes,
Men were seen as stronger than women, I guess. in the
Mhm.
blueprint. And for
absolutely.
her- and for her to defeat an army is something that is like ironic.
Okay, very good. Although the blueprint woman is seen as the military force, right? So it fits actually, but in general, you're right. Man is the strong one, here she is the one. So we already have a fluidity of gender roles in the biblical text, very strong. We don't have fixed, rigid gender roles, clearly, right? But then you also have different types of, you have alternative lifestyles in the biblical text, right? She doesn't have children. She's rather a judge, a leader, a political leader, and her children are the whole country, right? The whole nation of Israel are her children, right? So that's a subversion already of the classical blueprint of man, woman, kids, right? You have this. All right, any other one? How about Moses? How does he not quite fit into the blueprint? Moses. I know we see him as perfect, but he's not.
Was he a murderer?
Well, that too, yeah, but with regards to gender,
Oh.
right? How does he not fit the blueprint of man, woman, children?
He never gets married.
He does, but you're on the right track. What
He leaves
happens?
them.
Huh?
He leaves them.
Yeah, he separates from his wife, right? This is a divorce. So he's a divorcee. Divorce, is that in English? Divorcee, or is that for women? What's for men? Divorcee. Oh, that divorcee's man? Okay. He's a divorcee, right? He's not united. I mean, he marries pretty, and has some kids, but the kids kind of become very they're not even part of the tribes of Israel. And he ends up separating from his wife, and yet he's one of the most prominent leaders, right, of the Jewish nation, right? So we have here somebody who went through a divorce, is not following the blueprint of man, woman, child, right?
His wife is still with him.
She is, but he separates from her. Right? Yeah, he does. It's very sad. Yeah, it's messed up. It's subtle. The biblical text is not making a big deal out of it, but you can tell that he sends her back home. Right? What
Oh.
does that mean? So, okay. So we have that. Okay, now look at this one. This is one we're going to study him actually. The prophet, well, let's look at the prophet Daniel. Prophet Daniel. Anybody know what was his situation? One of the most visionary prophets of the biblical text, right? Somebody very, very, who had access to the heavenly realms, right? He was astral traveling, right? You guys know about astral traveling?
Yeah.
That he was doing that, right? He was able to see the throne room. He had powerful visions, and yet how was his situation in terms of the blueprint? Anybody know? Not only was he unmarried, but possibly he was a eunuch, which is the worst possible. We're going to talk about eunuchs today, right? So no woman, no kids. And yet celebrated as one of the most powerful visionaries of the Hebrew Bible, right? Then you have the New Testament, right? And there you have, of course, the main character of the New Testament, married, kids. Who was he? Jesus. No woman, no kids, right? And yet the savior of the world, right? So, and then you have Paul, the Apostle Paul. How was he?
He did not have any physical children of his own. He wasn't married, I believe.
Yeah, he says, I wish for everyone to be unmarried as I am, right? So and what's the reason? Why does he celebrate singleness? So this is completely outside of the blueprint now. Why does he celebrate singleness?
Was it to do with purity?
No, oh no, not Paul. He's a Jew, remember. There's no impurity in sex, right? But there's something a single person can do that a married person cannot do. Yeah. No, not for Paul, no. Kingdom related. It has to be kingdom related. How is a single person a more powerful force for the kingdom than a married person? Yeah, you have time. You're not burdened by your family. You can give yourself to the Lord, right? So there is a celebration of singleness, which you would never find in the Hebrew Bible, right? But it's moving, it's progressing, right? And then you have a celebration of alternative unions, right? Anybody know some unusual unions? I think you brought it up, Gubin, at one point. Unusual covenants or unions that are outside of, not marriages between men and women, but different type of covenant.
Oh, yeah. David and Jonathan.
Exactly. David and Jonathan had a covenant together, right? Of course, they were both married. They had kids and so forth, but they had a love. The love is celebrated. And when Jonathan dies, David writes a poem where he says, this man I have loved with a stronger love than the love I had for women, my love for this man was stronger than the love I had for women, right? So there's a really powerful love between these two people, and there is a covenant, right? So the biblical text even allows for covenantal relationship, right, between men, between two men. It's not a marriage, right? And I don't think there was anything sexual between them, but definitely there was powerful attraction, powerful, a connection, right? So are you seeing something that I'm seeing here? We have the blueprint, and then we have many people conforming to the blueprint, but then you have some of the most celebrated biblical characters are not conforming to the blueprint. Do you follow me? That in itself is liberating, right? The biblical text is not saying, that if you are not in that category of man, woman, kids, that you're anything less. On the contrary, some of the most powerful destinies were lived by people who were not in the blueprint. You follow? So this is very interesting. You have in the biblical text itself a subversion of the blueprint. You see what I'm doing? It does this all the time. Biblical text is constantly deconstructing itself. Make sure you write this down, because this is a key exegetical, hermeneutical tool to realize that the biblical text is continuously deconstructing itself. It's continuously undoing itself. You never have this and that's it forever, and then we're stuck. The biblical text is very fluid, right? It's very flexible. There is air, there is expansion, right? There is expanse, right? So expansiveness. And this is very typical of the text, right? So, okay. So I just wanted to start with that, because that's quoted, right? This famous blueprint is quoted as, see, Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. But actually, the biblical text allows for different types of lifestyles. Alternative lifestyles, in fact, are even at times celebrated and make possible powerful destinies. Any questions on this so far, or comments, or discomforts? Anything you want to say about the blueprint issue? Okay. Are we ready to get into biblical law? You're going to be a lawyer, so this is good for you. Okay. All right. All right. So
You were discussed at a meeting. No.
we all have bad experience with lawyers, so.
And the kind of law that defends people with money.
Oh, come on. You can't be serious. All right, moving on.
That's a joke. That's on there.
All right. So here's to start with, before we can look at biblical law, there's a little detail that most people omit to realize. And I think this is very important to realize before you can get into biblical law. The type of homosexual context or behavior or unions that we have today, right? The fact that homosexuality is seen as essential. I'm born that way, right? And then that these people want to have often a faithful marriage, want to marry, right? That phenomenon of homosexuality being lived as essential, being born that way, and then wanting to marry your partner does not exist in the biblical text. We do not have this case of somebody who's essentially homosexual and of the will to marry a same-sex marriage, and a homosexual essentiality does not exist. It does not exist. Now, you can derive two things. One, you can be disappointed. Be like, see, the erasure of the homosexual in the Bible, right? So that, right, on the one hand, it looks like, okay, they don't exist, right? But there's a silver lining, guys. Yes, there is an erasure. Perhaps they didn't exist. Perhaps it's a recent phenomenon. In Greece, they did. So, I don't know, right? The Greek text, 300 BC, acknowledges that there are people who are born gay and people who are born heterosexual. So the Greeks have a very early sense that there is an essential homosexual nature. The biblical text there's not a story, there's not a verse that talks about this, right? So either they didn't have, or they didn't know, or they're repressing, right? Let's admit it. There is, however, a silver lining. What is the silver lining that they don't mention? The existence of essential homosexual being and desire to have same-sex marriage. What is the silver lining here of this erasure of homosexuality or homosexual essence in the biblical text? Anybody see the silver lining here? Yes?
So some people have suggested that because the Bible doesn't have a concept of somebody being born with a gay sexuality, that means that when it outlaws homosexual relations there, it's not outlawing those relations among people that are born that way, but rather outlawing it among people that are just experimenting or don't have those initial inclinations.
Exactly. You can't legislate over something which doesn't exist, right? So the good news is that whatever law we have, in a way, does not apply to our particular context. You follow? That's huge, because now you can't go around quoting the Bible for now, because they didn't have what is happening now. You follow me? So whatever law we're gonna read, because they don't have the fact doesn't exist for them of homosexual essence, you cannot then use that law to outlaw what is happening now, because it's a issue that did not exist then. You follow me? You see the silver lining? Whatever law has been used, right? Whatever verse has been used to condemn same-sex marriage, for example, or same-sex relationships, cannot apply, because the way homosexuality is experienced today as something essential that I'm born with, right, simply did not exist or was not I doubt, it's hard for me to believe that they're repressing it. I want to be honest, because the biblical text is really very free and showing all kinds of behaviors from they cut up a woman in pieces and sent her, her body parts throughout the land. So we have, horrifying situations. If there was that situation, it would have been spoken about, right? The biblical text is not a Puritan text. It talks about everything. So I go in the direction that in that context didn't exist rather than was repressed, simply because the biblical text is not good at repressing itself. It's constantly talking about everything. Yeah.
But how do you know that that's not what they're talking about here? That's not what they're not referring to our modern, the same situation we have in modern day.
Well, if the case doesn't exist then, how can they legislate on it? So they are legislating on what is happening then. We have to look at what is happening then. You follow?
Why are you assuming that that wasn't happening then?
Because I know what was happening then, but this here, what we have now, you don't see it when you study the context, ancient Near Eastern context, and you look at the type of relationships that were homosexual, you don't have this notion of, in any text, of, a man, except in Greek text, right? Of a man loving a man and being essentially gay. You don't have this, I don't see it. There's no stories about it. Maybe, right? There was as a reality, but I don't see stories. So I don't see it like,
Yeah,
you know?
the argument is that it was probably there, they just didn't understand it. I mean, think about how recently in America we just got to the point where we understand that no, this is something that people
Yeah.
don't choose.
Absolutely. Well, the Greeks already were they knew,
They
right?
understood that people didn't choose, that people don't choose their sexuality.
Yeah, the symposium, remember? Some people are created male. Remember the Aristophanes speech where you have the male. Some people are created to love males, some people are created to love, females love females, and then male love. So the Greeks were aware and very articulate. The Hebrews, it's not there. And I want to add that I don't think it's a repression of it, because the Hebrews are so out there about everything. Like they will talk about everything. So I wonder if maybe in the culture they just didn't have the words for it, but it doesn't matter. All we can remember is that it's not a case, therefore you can't legislate on it, right? So it's a new case, in other words. Now this is where we're making progress. If it's a new case, how do we connect the Bible to a new case? Now, what's very interesting, so make sure you write down the first key point in the argument. It's not a case. It's not a reality. Therefore, you cannot legislate on it, right? Or at least it's not a reality that has been verbalized. Maybe it's a reality, but it hasn't been verbalized. It hasn't been narrated. There are no stories. So I'm led to believe there is no case, right? Okay. Now, what do we do when there is a new case, biblically speaking, right? So it's very interesting. And this is where we leave the usual Christian interpretation. Christian interpretation is like the people in the Constitution who interpret it like how the originalists, like, yeah, the Supreme Court, help me, it's the originalists, is the people who go to the Constitution and say, we take it literally, that's it, it doesn't move.
They have they're different judges that have different kind of philosophy.
Exactly.
Like, when the Supreme Court was created, I think it was with the intention that we're going to be strict with the Constitution. But then because there are clauses in the Constitution that seem to suggest you can be more flexible,
yes,
people justify their flexibility and still say it's strictness.
Yes.
I don't know.
So you have, I think they're called the originalists, and a lot of judges right now are that. So they take the Constitution literally, you don't move it. It says that, we follow it, right? And then there's the other ones who say, well, we need to reinterpret according to today. So we have to do some interpretation. Remember that, you follow me? Have you followed a little bit? Nobody's watching the news. Yes, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you said there's no case for homosexuality, so the law does not what?
Well, you can't legislate on something that doesn't exist, right? That's the issue, right? That's the silver lining. Okay, so just like in the Supreme Court, you have, or in the Constitution, you have a way of interpreting which takes it as that's it, end of story. And then you have a way of interpreting where we adapt it to today. Is the same with biblical law. So when a Christian reads the Bible, he sees the verse, that's it, end of story. It's different in biblical interpretation. The biblical text is open to shifting with the times. And I'm going to give you examples of that. Okay, so make sure you jot this down. The biblical text is open to shift. So biblical law, not even this text, biblical law shifts in time. As new cases arise, the biblical law is actually tweaked, nuanced, even changed. Give me an example of that. There's a very powerful example of a biblical law being radically overturned because a new case arose. And this is in the book of Exodus with Moses and a bunch of women. Anybody remember? Yes.
So
go ahead.
in Deuteronomy, the law was that territories passed down via tribes. A father will have sons, and so he passes on his territory like via sons, and women don't necessarily pass down this territory. And then there were a group of women that came in to Moses, and they said, like, our father has passed away. He didn't have any sons. He just had a couple daughters. We think it's unfair that his territory won't be passed down, or he won't have an inheritance with the rest of Israel because he didn't have any sons. So we should inherit some of the land.
Exactly.
And so Moses takes it up with God, and God says, that they're right. Like if a man has no sons and only daughters, then the daughters will inherit the property when he passes away.
Exactly. It's a very powerful moment of God changing the law because a new case arose. The law was only sons inherit, right? Turns out a man had 5 daughters who weren't married. So the land of that man was not going to be passed down. He was going to lose everything. So they come to Moses and they say, we want to inherit. Change the law. Moses is like, what do? I don't know. It's from God, right? He goes to God and God is like, change the law. That's insane. Are you seeing how powerful this is? In other words, biblical law is flexible enough to change when a new case arises, right? And so my question to biblical exegetes when it comes to the new case of homosexuality as it is lived today, why are we not why are we so rigid, right? That's the question I'm asking. Why is the law not flexible enough to address this, right? Rather than saying, poof, there's this verse, now go to hell. That's where you're headed anyways, right? Or why, right? The biblical law itself invites us, the biblical text itself invites us towards this flexibility. When there's a new case, we ought to revisit those laws. The law is not in stone. It's a paradox, right? The only thing in stone is the 10 Commandments. Everything else we can negotiate, right? Yes.
I think for Adam, like first punishment, whatever. I think he needs a punishment is kind of like God making sure that moon will go over her. I think it creates a plot, like the whole femininity wanting to explore. But God is saying, no, we're gonna be earthbound there and just stay and just follow Earth's wisdom, and I think what you're saying about like how, why is it not being flexible, whatever, I think it's gonna go with the masculine way of nature. It should just be that thing,
Yeah.
and not other than explore, other than,
Yes, I
discovery.
absolutely agree. Be careful though, because it is even the men who are realizing we have to be flexible, right? But it is a feminine, you can call it a feminine approach, right? Absolutely. And there's in the Bible, there's very rigid moments and very flexible moments. And that's what you're catching on to. And, the question I would ask is, is it not possible to, to open the law in order to address more carefully this new this new event, right? We are not, I don't believe we're doing, there's a lot being done, right? But I don't believe in conservative context. We're doing enough, right? We are following even the biblical hermeneutics. The Bible is teaching us this, right? When there's a new case, you can revisit, and the law might even be overturned or tweaked and so forth, right? So, okay, so let's do that. Let's do that work, right? We have laws not applied to this, but we do have laws talking about same sex. So let's look at a few of those laws, which is what I give you. And the goal will be, first of all, remember they don't apply directly to the context we are in today, but we can begin to interpret, understand what they mean, and then we can draw lessons for today. Are you ready? We're going to do that. Okay, we're going to look at 3 different laws. We're going to look what they mean in the context, and then what we can draw for today. Let us remember that, again, there is no specific law for what is going on today. It simply was not a reality at the time. Okay, let's start with Leviticus 18. Okay, so you read a little bit. So we're going to apply the 4 layers of interpretation. It's always good to do this. Pshat, remes, drash, sod. Remember, this is the 4 ways that we can look at the text. Okay, Leviticus 18, verse, what's the verse? Verse 22. What is the pshat? Read the verse in your Bibles. What does it say? And remember, the pshat is a literal, the remes, you go into the grammar, drash, you think about it, and you get to those deeper layers. Go ahead.
You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination.
Okay, very good. Okay, I need another translation.
Sure.
Go ahead.
22.
Mhm.
You shall not lie with I think it's the same. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman.
Okay, good. What is your, okay, King James, you too.
I have
Orthodox.
NIV here.
Go ahead, NIV. King James is very good translation. But a lot of translations translate differently, so I want to look at
I
that.
remember I have the small King James, which says you shall not lie with mankind as womankind.
Oh, okay, that's pretty good. What does NIV say? Anybody have a different, what do you have? What's your translation?
This is the English Standard.
Okay, what does it say?
Something that says, you shall not lie with a male as with a woman, it is an honor.
Okay, good. I still need the NIV. You got it?
Do not have sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman.
Okay.
That is detestable.
Very good. So do you see the difference between what he just read and what y'all just read? Do not have sex with a man as you would with a woman. That's here. A lot of translations translate like that. Don't go with a man as you would with a woman. The actual word is male. That changes that's a nuance that's very important, which you should have caught, right? Okay, but in any case, you read, do not have sex with a man as you would with a woman. What's the pshat? How would you, which is where most people are? Well, what do you deduce from that? Yes?
That being gay, the sin,
Exactly. Very good. Being gay is a sin. It's an abomination. End of story. You're all going to hell. Okay, that's the pshat. And that's when people say the Bible is very clear. It is. What's unclear about that? Don't go with a man as you would with a woman. Stop doing that, right? Okay, now we need to go into the deeper layers, okay? And we can because we have the tools. Remez looks at the context and at the language, okay? Let's start with the context, okay? What is the context of this verse? Leviticus 18, what does it talk about?
Laws of sexual morality.
Okay, and what are the laws? Summarize in one, they're all the same, most of them, actually.
Oh, don't have sex outside of the person who's your husband or wife.
Okay, definitely you have that, but who can't you have sex with? It's always the same, actually.
Family members and married people.
And what kind of family members? Not just any.
Close relatives,
And what kind of close relatives?
sister, aunt.
Sister, daughter, aunt, mother. What do you see here?
Female.
All female. Okay, this is important detail. Are you getting this? We're paying attention to context. Context is incest. First of all, so context is you're married. That's the context. You're a man, you're married. Okay. So number 1, you're married. That's the first problem. Number two, incest is people close to you who are female. So interestingly, there's no law telling the females don't go with your uncle, your nephew, right? Take note of that. You see that these details are important, right? Why? You should have asked yourself the question when reading this, why doesn't have, laws again for women to not go with the uncle, with the nephew, with the brother, right? Why it's only for men, right? Write down this question. We're doing drash. Any question is already on the level of drash, right? You observe. Remez is the you observe. Drash, you question. So we're observing. Woman doesn't have the same laws. Context is incest, right? Why only women mentioned, right? Okay, jot down the questions. Look at the 3 last laws in Leviticus 18. Let's continue to observe. We're just observing. 3 last laws have to do with what's not incest anymore.
Oh, animals.
Okay, animals. Okay, jot down animals. Why? What's the other? And then the one, this our verse, right? Don't lie with a male as you would with a female. And then what's the one right before? Before the one on male and male?
Neighbor's wife.
No, right before there's something about
Oh.
kids.
All right, don't
Don't throw your kids in the fire, right?
sacrifice. your
Don't
kids.
sacrifice your kids. Okay, you got all the details? You guys should be, okay, do you see the questions you should be asking? Why only female relatives, right? Why is male to male, right? Why is that connected to incest? What's the connection? You see, I'm doing drash right now. Now I'm starting to ask questions. Then why are the last 3 children, animals, and male to male, are they connected? Are you seeing where I'm going? Okay, now let's try to answer this. Let's see. Oh, and one last thing, the language. Why you will not sleep with a male as you would with a woman? Why doesn't it say, so it's a different category, right? Why doesn't it say you won't sleep with a man as you would with a woman? That's what you expect. Don't sleep with a man as you would with a woman. What does it imply when it says don't sleep with a male as you would with a woman? What's the implication here? Yeah,
Does it have to do with like being an adult?
very good. Male could be a young boy. Don't go with a male, i.e. could be a young boy, as you would sleep with a woman. In other words, don't sexually abuse, right? The younger boys in your community, right? Which was a thing, by the way, at the time. It's still a thing. Have you read The Kite Runner or seen the movie? And the Taliban, what they were doing, what was their thing, right? That was a thing in the Middle East, to have young boys and around and just use them as you would a woman, right? So that was a thing in the ancient Near East. So you see all the details. Okay, let's excavate now. Let's look and see what's going on. What is really the command telling us? Yes.
I read somewhere that usually back in the day, like older men will like sleep with young men to like build their like power and like feel more power within themselves.
Absolutely, right?
Less of a man, less masculine.
Yeah, especially in patriarchal societies, in very, when you were a very powerful man surrounded by, all kinds of people all the time, this is a thing that was taking place normal, right? Yes, yeah, I'm not surprised. Right? Okay, now let's look, now we have asked all these questions. Let's start to interpret, right? Let's see what is going on. First of all, let's answer the first question. So we got the question with a male. Now we know that it could imply underage, right? Sexual abuse of young males in the community, right? But why is that verse situated in the context? Go deeper. Why is it situated in the context of incest and only when it comes to female relatives? Why is he only talking about female relatives? What's the implication? Why is the text protecting only women? Why not men? It's wrong to go with your uncle. I shouldn't go with my brother or my son, or sorry, my brother's son, not my son. Well, I think that's there too. So why is only a command given to men? Why the woman not told not go with? Why is the woman not prohibited? It's because what?
Men.
So are we? Have you met us? Yes.
Yeah, I think there's like back to the Adam and Eve, but I think because Adam rules over it, there's nobody ruling him. So it's like, even if there's like no type of like guidance, they could just do anything they felt like to do. And and to the point where it's like the man's imagination can be evil, I do think that's alright, but I'm like a person imagine, a man's imagination could really like go haywire, like Cain, for example.
Mhm.
Or so I'm like, yeah.
Okay, very good. Right. It's vulnerable populations that are protected. The woman is a vulnerable, right? That is why there is a law, right? The woman, if she has these ideas, she can never force a male to do it, right? But a man can force a female. A man can go to his, daughter, can go to his wife's sister, can go to his wife's daughter and force himself on her. The woman cannot do that to a man. And so the law is for men to protect the vulnerable women that are inevitably going to be around him. You follow? So the whole incest is not about incest. It's about sexual, what do you call it? Sexual abuse or
Preference.
rape. It's about rape, actually, right? The whole first section that we say is about incest is actually about rape, because otherwise, if it was just about incest, you would have also the women being told, don't go with the men. But it's only the women. Why? Because they're vulnerable. So the whole context is rape until you get to our verse, and now it's not rape. Now it's homosexuality. You see what I'm saying? It seems to me that our verse, in the context of rape, what does it mean about our verse? If the context of the verse is rape, how can we read our verse now? Do not go with a male as you would with a female. Male being possibly underage, right? Because otherwise it would be a man. What is our verse actually saying, given the context? What do you see? Do you see it? Okay, I'll say it again. Context of the text of our verse is rape, right? If that's the context, we should look at our verse differently, right? Is our verse about rape? And if so, how? What do you see? Do not go with a male as you would with a woman. Yes?
Don't break down.
You could translate like that, right? Based on the context and the language, the text seems to be more about violating young men than about two men, right, having sex together. You follow? That's where I'm headed. And then it gets exacerbated when you look at the surrounding text, children who are burnt in the fire, and then animals. And I was like, why animals? Who cares, right? And actually I read that nowadays it's very hurtful to the animal, actually. If you do that, it's a form of sexual abuse to the animal suffers enormously when you have sex with it as a human being, right? And I was reading some articles. I know it's shocking, it's awful. And there's a whole thing on the internet about it too. I was appalled. I know, but I mean, I didn't think it was a thing, like a big thing. Like, apparently it is. So, and apparently it's very hurtful to, right? So what we have in Leviticus 18 is really a chapter on rape, on forcing yourself on people who will not consent, who do not have the ability to consent, right? Who do not have the ability to resist. That's one possible way to read the text, right? If you look at the context and if you look at the language, I'm deriving that the emphasis here, okay, is not so much man. It's not even there. It's not about man to man. It's about man to young boy, right? Given the context, I translated man to young boy. You follow? And so that verse for me is about pedophilia or about sexual abuse between a man and a younger boy. And it's not really, seems to me, about man and man. You follow me? Any objections? I need objections to refine what I'm saying. Who is disturbed? Who doesn't see? First of all, do you see what I just said? Are you following the reasoning? Okay, good. Now, any discomforts? Because I know you will bring up something at some point.
I want to translate something in Hebrew first.
Okay, go ahead. Yes.
I really agree with Charlie, but just that usually you do say go with the Bible, if I go with the text, I said reading out. It was like, I do agree with you. I really do. I do see how it makes sense. Like men can really be like, so overruled for that. But the text does say mankind, so it kind of like makes sense.
It doesn't say mankind. It says male. That's a translation. The Hebrew zachar, I believe zachar means male, like a male. This is a male, a male, a male. But then it says you will not go with a male, and it doesn't say as you would a female. It says as you would a grown woman or your wife. So it's talking about an adult man having sex, having a, sex with a younger male, and given the context, right? If there was not the context, you could say it's any male, all ages, right? But the context is all about people who are vulnerable to rape, right? So that's how I'm deducing that, okay? So you see, it's not, so you see how when you go deeper, it's not as simple, and the Bible is not as clear as people want it to be, right? Okay, are we ready to move on to the next, to the New Testament, which is also quite interesting? Okay, let's go to actually just 1 Corinthians 6:9. Let's go to that since we have a little limited time. So anyways, they all say the same thing. Okay, so I was intrigued there. I don't know if you caught it. So first of all, let's translate. Okay, I need to pull up the. What you have it? Can I take a look? Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you. So 1 Corinthians 6:9, there's a list, bunch of sins, right? All right. So fornicators, idolaters, adulterers, homosexuals, sodomites. Wow. Okay. Let's look at the Greek. So Greek, I want to pull it up. Okay. I'm gonna pull it up. How do I do that? Minus this. Okay. Actually, I can look on my phone. Thank you. Thank you. Someone grabbed their phones. So if you want to see the Greek, you go to Interlinear Bible. And then Greek. And we're going to learn 4 Greek words. Sorry. 1 Corinthians 6:9. Okay. So we're going to properly translate. And it's not working. Okay. Why? Bible Hub, 1 Corinthians 6:9. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm gonna go on my computer because it seems to be better. This, here we are. 1 Corinthians 6:9. Okay, here we are. Okay. So do you know that the unrighteous ones of the kingdom, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the list is this. We'll write in the Greek, okay? So you can learn some nice Greek words. So we have exact. So first it's called pornoi, from our word porn. How fun. Okay, we know one word. Then we have idololatry. Idololatry. Then we have moichoi. Spell it good. Moichoi. Then we have malakoi. And then we have arsenokoitai. Arsenokoitai. Okay. Good. Let's look at this. Okay. First word, pornoi. That's simply promiscuous behavior. Okay? Both male and female, by the way, right? Anytime you're out there with someone who's not your wife or husband, you're in the pornoi category, male or female. Okay, it's not just okay. Idololatry, you can sense in English what it means. Idolo, idolatrous, right? So interesting, idolatrous. Then you have moichoi, that's adulterer, male and female, right? Anybody who commits adultery. Malakoi is interesting. Malakoi in the classical Greek, when you look at the classical Greek text, it's male prostitute. Okay, so there was a lot of male prostitution in the temples at the time. So you had a lot of male prostitutes walking around, right? And then, now here's the one. Arsenokoitai is a reference to the text we just read in Leviticus 18. I will tell you why. Because that word doesn't exist in classical Greek. So it's not, pedophilia or whatever. It's not any of those, right? It's not used in classical Greek, but you find it when you go back to our text, which is Leviticus 18, and you read the Greek translation of it. The same verse we read talks about that. So it's an allusion to that verse. You follow? So arsenokoitai is an allusion to what we just read in Leviticus 18, verse, what is it? Verse 22. Okay? All right. Yes? A meaning, the we established the violation of a younger man,
Okay.
right? Say, pedophilia, I suppose you could just summarize it like that, right? Pedophilia. Translated here, homosexuals, right? Of course. But it's interesting because he doesn't use the word in classical Greek that you could use for homosexual, right? He uses the ancient Hebrew, right? Alludes to the ancient Hebrew text where it's based on the context, a case of pedophilia. You follow? Okay, so we have now just the male prostitutes. So I want you to notice something unusual. I'm going to read the list again. And then that's the first 5, right? Then you have the last 5, which is about stealing and so forth. But I'm looking at these first 5, which are sexual sins. And I want you to notice an interesting detail. What's wrong with the picture? Okay, I'm reading again. Don't be deceived. Neither the promiscuous, the idolaters, the adulterers, the male prostitutes, or the what do you call it? Pedophiles, right? Will make it into the kingdom. Okay, what's wrong with this picture? There's one sin that doesn't fit.
Idolatry.
Yeah, what's that doing there? You see what I'm doing? You should have seen this. Like you have a long list of sexual sins all grouped together, because afterwards they don't come up, then it's like thieving, lying, and so forth. You have a long list of sexual sins, and in the middle you have idolatry. What is that? Why? Okay, let's ask ourselves this. Let's begin to parse this, right? What's the text? What's the implication here that idolatry is found in the middle of this sexual sins? What's the meaning? Let's ponder this. Let's do some drash. What's the connection between the sexual sins that are listed and idolatry? That will help us understand what is the problem.
Is idolatry not sexual sin? I think it's very much a
Ah,
sexual sin.
how? Explain.
You're having sex with somebody you're not supposed to have sex with.
In idolatry?
Oh, I can't confuse it with adultery.
No, no, idolatry. Is it
My
so?
fault.
Yeah, no, it's strange, right? You have promiscuity, adultery, pedophilia, male prostitution, and then idolatry. Thank you. What is idolatry, guys?
Like
Alright.
you were like worshiping a false god, or like a
Other
like a
gods.
statue.
Yeah, you worship other gods than God, right? That's idolatry. Now, why is idolatry here in this group of sins? Yes,
I feel like it's kind of similar to cheating, like you're cheating on God if you're like thinking about
exactly.
things.
The main issue of all of what unites all of these sexual sins is that they're a deviation from the partner you were with, right? You're with one partner, you're supposed to be faithful, and now you're going with multiple partners. All of these sexual sins have the same common denominator. It's about moving beyond the faithful relationship to one partner, moving beyond monogamy towards polygamy, right? In a sense, just like in idolatry, you move away from monotheism to polytheism. They are connected in the biblical ethos, right? Okay. So what do we learn from this text? What's the sin here? Why is it so sinful to be a male prostitute, to be a pedophile, to be adulterer and promiscuous? They're all the same, right? Yeah.
And like you said, they're all a deviation from God, and they all involve, I guess, in some way hurting another person.
Except promiscuous. Although, okay, let's go over that. Adultery, somebody gets hurt, yes. Male prostitution, who gets hurt? Who gets hurt in the male prostitute? You have a young male, underage, in a temple. The male, the prostitute itself, right? What's the other one? Pedophilia, who gets hurt?
Child.
The child. What's the first one? Promiscuity, who gets hurt? This is our context, right? Having sex with multiple partners, who gets hurt? Consenting adults. What's the problem? Yes? So that's for the cheater, but what about, so cheaters, why everybody?
Promiscuity, like, because you said it's consensual, right?
Yeah,
So it's wrong, so if.
why is it wrong? Why is it here? We don't think it's wrong, right? We think everything else is wrong, but this, no, well, so what's wrong with promiscuity? Yeah,
It could lead to cheating, and also some people might already consider that cheating.
oh, why is that?
being promiscuous if you're in a relationship?
Well, no, if you're not in a relationship, actually, those guys were all in married, actually. But no, we have adultery. I can't talk. We have adultery already, so it's something else.
Oh, if you're like single?
Yeah, if you're single, it seems like, because adultery is already taking care of that, right? So there's no infidelity. It's just promiscuity, multiple partners. What's the issue? Yeah.
There's no
It's like it touches somebody's faith. And something
why I
like
said
it changes somebody's faith. So what will initially be God, it's now something else.
Okay, so definitely some movement from the fidelity to one to the many, right? So that in itself is problematic in the biblical ethical system, right? Because there's the notion of one God, one partner, right? They're connected. So if you're all over here, you're actually kind of living the life of an idolater, right? Or you're an idolatrous, how shall I put it? You're like, yeah, you're kind of living an idolatrous lifestyle, we could say, right? According to
So the word idol sticks out to me, but the idolizing something that's not closely idolized.
or you're relying on something that's not your partner, or that's not yet your partner, right? So you're kind of so that's the issue, right? The issue is you want to be one, right? In the biblical text, it's always you want to be one and focused on the one. If you're out here everywhere, you're losing that.
The hour class now? I mean, it's a long topic class now?
No, I'm gonna end soon.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
okay,
I'm
so
gonna,
that's
you have
class.
to go, right? Yeah, no, I'm ending. No worries, no worries. Okay, so, all right, so you can see here that we don't have the word, well, if the last term, arsenokoitai, translated as homosexuality, but if that term is not found anywhere except in Leviticus 18:22, which we have already determined that it has to do with pedophilia, I would translate that as pedophilia. You see what I'm saying? You follow me? So we have the problems here is general problems with everyone, right? Including male prostitution, which is an abuse of the young men who go into that, and then the pedophilia, which is an abuse also, right? So that's how I would translate that. So now we have seen a bunch of legal texts too, which are not applied obviously to today's context because it's a different context, but we can still draw lessons for today's context. What are two lessons we can draw from these texts regarding today's context? What can we learn, both hetero and homosexual, from these texts? Yeah.
Not abuse and not abuse.
Okay, number one, right, abstain from sexually abusing people. So don't take advantage of someone who is not at the age of consent, maybe we could say, whether it's a child, an animal, a younger boy or woman, right? This is all vulnerable people. So there's a notion of respecting consent, right? And the number two, ethical morality, or moral lesson we can draw from all of these texts, especially the New Testament one, is what? Yes?
Don't cheat on God or anybody else.
Right, the emphasis on monogamy, right? That's the ideal here. That is, yeah, faithfulness is what is the text looking for, right? That's the goal. And if you're doing all that, you're not practicing faithfulness, right? You're not learning that, right? You're losing that virtue of faithfulness, right? So very different, right? So now, so you can see how these texts that are thrown around, right, and that are sometimes mistranslated, really don't bring anything to the table, right? Just telling gay people, right, stop it or you'll go to hell is not helpful, right? And the biblical text is wanting to be helpful. Biblical text is supposed to redeem, not oppress and block and just, imprison people. It's supposed to help people live full, abundant lives, right? So we have to go deeper and interpret more carefully with more subtlety and be able to draw lessons for our present context, which is radically different than the context of the time, right? Okay, now what I want to do, I know some of you have to go, but I just want to do one little thing about exclusion, excommunication. Who can stay maybe 15 minutes longer? 1, 2, 3, 4. You can't, and you? No? Okay, yes?
What is the third one again?
Third one, okay, that's all right. Let's go over. So pornoi is like promiscuity. Idolatra, that's idolatry. Moichoi is adultery. Adultery, yeah, adultery, yeah. And then malakoi is male prostitution, temple prostitutes. And then arsenokoita is the allusion to Leviticus 18:22. Okay, those who have to go, you can go, and those who can stay, you stay, and I'll just finish that section.
What's the number of our classroom? What classroom are we in right now?
Now 302. Yeah. Okay.
You go over the line,
I can afterwards. Yeah, sure.
what's it called?
Yeah. We can go over that. Yeah, I'll just finish the excommunication thing and then we can turn off the video and even turn it on or whatever. All right, thank you guys. Thank you. And just make sure you watch the rest. And I'll post it up. Okay, good. Okay, so let's look at the paradigm for exclusion, right? Because we are dealing, especially, actually, almost in all religious communities, we are living right now through the exclusion of homosexuals, right? You have, yeah, they can come, but they should sit in the back and not show anything. I don't want to know. And definitely they cannot officiate, right? There's still the debate whether they can be priests, whether they can be pastors. And if they come to church, please keep your hands to yourself. We don't want to know that you're dating or married or whatever, right? So there is a kind of exclusion that's definitely, you know, there. We're going to see, right? So I want to look at how the Bible handles exclusion, right? And I start with Deuteronomy 23. So please go to, so there's 3 types of people that are excluded from church, from God, in Deuteronomy 23. And you'll see that gay people in a way fit somewhat in that category. And I'll see why, we'll see why. Who can read me Deuteronomy 23 verses 1 to 3? 23 verses 1 to 3.
No one whose testicles are crushed or whose male organs is cut off shall enter the assembly of the Lord. No one born of a forbidden union may enter an assembly of the Lord. Even the 10th generation, none of his descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord. No Ammonite?
Yeah.
Ammonite or
Ammonite.
or Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord. Even to the 10th generation, none of them may enter the assembly.
Okay, so we have here 3 groups of people that are excluded. We have the eunuchs. We have the people from illicit birth. So
Again,
they were born, the parent committed adultery, got a bastard child, and that's bastards. So bastards, they can't do it. And then Moabites. Okay, so let's look at why. So the Moabite is a nation not allowed into the church. Moab, Moab.
that's the thing.
Yeah, that was the thing. Yeah, we'll explain why, right? Why? There's reasons why. So this particular nation, the Moabites, they cannot come. Bastard children can't come, and eunuchs can't draw near to God. They're not welcome in the church, right? Okay, the why the eunuchs? Let's look at that. Anybody know why the eunuchs would be excluded? So these are castrated men, right, who served for kings. They were part of the court. Usually in the ancient Near East, they would usually keep the harems of women, right? They were the ones responsible for the concubines and so forth. Or they were the wise men, but they were castrated. Why can't we have a castrated person approach God? What's wrong with castrated person?
I mean, it says that they can't enter into the marriage group, so maybe they just don't want people that are incapable of having children to
Okay.
marry somebody that is capable of having a child and keeping them from having kids.
Yes, and essentially they can have kids, right? So in the biblical context, remember we'll study this when we talk about the holiness code in Leviticus, but you can't approach God if you're associated with death, right? You can only approach God if you're associated with life, because God is life. So the eunuch, because he's castrated, cannot produce life, is associated with death, right? Therefore, you don't come near God, right? So the holiness code, which we'll study next time, is basically God can only be approached by life, cannot be anything that has touched death or is connected to death cannot approach God. Make sense? So the eunuch, because he cannot give life, therefore he is excluded. Makes sense, right? Now, homosexuals is the same category in a way. That's what people say, right? They can't have children. That's the problem. You can't have children. That's why you shouldn't be a Christian or a Jew, right? And so I will put the homosexual today is close to the category of the eunuch in terms of the problem, right? Then you have the illicit birth, so that has to do also with life, but it's a distorted life. It's a life outside of life, right? It's a child conceived outside of the marriage, the fidelity. Therefore, it's a messed up child, right? The life he has is distorted, not supposed to have been. He's not supposed to be alive, this child, right? Supposed to be dead, so cannot approach. And then you have the Moabites, and their problem was, this was early in the history of Israel when they were leaving Egypt, going through the desert and coming into the promised land. They came upon the nation of Moab, and they needed water and food. They had run out, and they were starving. They were dying, and they asked that nation, please, can you share? We'll buy from you. Like, can you sell us your goods? And they said, no, just die, die in the desert. We don't care. And so that nation is associated with death, right? They,
But why though? Like, why would they?
because well, it was a very big group coming, about 500,000 people. And they were afraid, I think, of being invaded. Just the same way we say no to Mexicans. It's just as absurd. It's like, we don't want to be invaded by this big group of people. We're going to lose our culture. We might lose our resources. No, stay outside, die. Okay, so same rationale. Okay. All right, now watch this. This is so interesting. What's interesting about these three categories is that when you continue reading the biblical text, every single one is overturned. All of them eventually have access. It's very interesting. Again, the biblical text is subverting itself. So let's look at this. Anybody can tell me how the Moabites made it back into the community? Yes. Ruth, the book of Ruth, which we're going to study, is a Moabite woman who enters a Hebrew village and single-handedly brings it back to life through her love and through her faithfulness and through her wonderful behavior, right? She's a loving, and virtuous woman. And that village was kind of, decrepit. Everything was, kind of dying out, and she brings it back to life, a Moabite. And who is she? She's also has a very high status in the genealogy of the kings. Can you tell me?
The grandmother of Solomon, or
King,
David.
David. She becomes the grandmother of the line, the kings, the royal line of Israel. That's incredible. And for Christians, where do we find this woman again? Ruth, I believe.
Indeed.
Yes.
And because Jesus is considered a descendant of David, he's also
Exactly.
a descendant of Ruth.
She's in the genealogy of Jesus, right? So she made it back for you. The Moabites are back, baby. Exactly.
Like, why are you like belittling his power?
Thank you. I like the way you're thinking. That's the idea. You're right on. That's the biblical text realizes that, right? That yes, there are restrictions that are perhaps man-made, and God himself breaks those barriers, right? So in the case of Moabites, they're back, right? They're in fact in the royal line, right? That's even worse. Now let's look at the other ones, which are the illicit ones. Let's find a few in the Hebrew Bible. Any important people who were from illicit marriages? Solomon, right? Born out of adultery. I mean, they were married by then, but still, right? Remember?
When he was born, they were married, but
Were
he was
they?
conceived in.
Was he because they had a first baby and he died?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't know that.
But still, I'll go with you. I like it because, yeah, King Solomon is coming from a woman that David killed her husband, slept with her, and then took her. That's where he comes from, right? Solomon. So he's a little bit off. What about David? Anybody saw anything about King David himself? There's a little hint there. Did you ever wonder why when the prophet comes to anoint David, he goes to the father, and the father brings up all the sons except David? If you know the story, right? So there's a prophet comes to anoint the next king, comes to the father of David, says, one of your sons is going to be king. And the father is like, okay, here are my sons. Everybody's there except David. And so he goes, the prophet goes and like, is it him, Lord? And the guy's like, no, is it him? Is it him? And then he finishes the whole, and he's like, don't you have any other sons? Because none of these work. And he's like, oh, yeah, I have one. He's out there in the fields. Yeah. So there's some, and also David in one of his, oh, now you come. Okay. All right. So in addition to that, you have a passage, a psalm, a song that David wrote where he says, I was conceived in sin, right? So there's some hint that maybe he was an illegitimate child, right? So, and then in the New Testament, who is the best illegitimate child we have? Yes, that one's easy.
You're calling Jesus?
Yes,
legitimate
well,
child.
yes, right? Right? He's an illegitimate child. We don't know who his father is. I mean, nobody does except him. He knows it's God, right? But everybody's like, what the hell? It's obviously not God, right? So he's an illegitimate child, right? So watch how these, right, the most powerful kings, including the Messiah king, are all illegitimate children, right? So now you have again an overturning of that decree, right? But the best one is the eunuchs. Let's go to Isaiah 56. Who can open Isaiah 56 and begin reading? So this is a prophecy about the end of times when God will rule over the earth. This is what will happen. Just begin reading from the top, Isaiah 56. Concerning the eunuchs. Just 56. 56.
Thus says the Lord, keep justice and do righteousness, for soon my salvation will come, and my righteousness be relieved. Blessed is the man who does this, and the son of the man who holds it fast, who keeps the Sabbath, not profaning it, and keeps his hand from doing any evil. Let not the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord say, okay, the Lord will surely separate me from his people. And let not the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree, for thus says the Lord, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, who choose the things that please me, and hold fast my covenant, I will give my house and within my walls a monument and a name better than sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off.
Okay, excellent. Well, there we go with the eunuchs. Back in the house, right? So are you seeing what I'm seeing? Right? There's a clear intention of inclusivity, right, in the biblical text. Clear intention, right? Even though human law has excluded, right, Mosaic law, which is, it's not the 10 Commandments is, in my view, the only true divine commands, right? 10 words from God directly on stone, cannot move. Everything else is Mosaic law. Law written by Moses that is flexible, that is up for interpretation, and which can change with the new cases, right? So we have human beings creating borders, creating distance, and then you have the biblical text itself working against those, right? And slowly moving towards ever greater inclusivity, right? That's the ethos. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm bringing something back, like even when Cain gets banished from the earth,
Exactly,
he still comes back.
exactly.
It's like this idea of like banning and from that. It's like people are just trying to into it, but it's really just like, if it's in the Bible, then it belongs. You know what I'm saying? Like, if it's in there, then it belongs. Why would you put it there to not? You know what I'm saying?
What do you mean?
Like, why would you put something that doesn't belong in the Bible for it to not be like
Like,
interpreted?
What's your, what point are you, what's this, what are you thinking?
There's more of like, if homosexuality is this bad thing, then why was it mentioned? Well, if it was interpreted that way, why was it mentioned?
Why wasn't it mentioned?
Why was it? Why was it?
Well, remember, it's not homosexuality as we
Yeah,
experience it, right?
exactly.
It was the way it was practiced was a problem, right? So there is a law against it, right?
Right, but if it's flexible,
Oh, bye, see you.
You know, if it doesn't have a flexible, then one way or the other, it will be being different, you know?
Yeah.
So like, why just, like, why put it there? You know?
Oh, because, you're saying if it's flexible, why put it there?
Right, because
Oh, yeah.
one day, one person will see it differently and will take it as, okay, you know, maybe this is not the way, like what we're doing right now, you know?
Well, we're careful. We're not changing the
Yeah,
text,
definitely,
right?
right.
So that's see, what I'm saying, what we have to realize is when we read the text, we should challenge the text, but we have to also let the text challenge us. So we should not change the text. We have to, the text is flexible, but shouldn't be cut off, right? So what I did here was I didn't change the text. I interpreted. I didn't change a word, right? That's the beauty of what we did here. So you can't break it. You can stretch it, but you can't break it. Then you're not in the Bible anymore. You can't go around saying now pedophilia is okay. I mean, it's too clear. That is clear, right? So, but when it comes to same-sex relationships, man to man, it's ambiguous, right? And the context seems to point to pedophilia rather than whatever, same sex, right? So, so yeah, of course, the Bible is flexible, but you can't change it, right? You can, I mean, yes, they overturned the inheritance law and so forth, right? So it is fluid and flexible, but you have to be careful when you change it that it doesn't go against, that it doesn't that's a tough question because we can change, but then we could change everything, right? That's what you're saying.
And not necessarily, it's just more like, if it doesn't belong, then why talk about it? You know, like, why put the people to one day think differently on it, you know?
Yeah, so remember the biblical text is geared towards life. It's how to live the most abundant life, right? So in that sense, it should be taken seriously. But when the commandment becomes death-giving, then it's a problem. Then we must be doing something wrong. That's how I interpret, right? If the commandment, there's a friend of mine, and you'll remember him, who said, if the gospel, how was it?
It's not good news.
Yeah.
Not the
If it's not good news, it's not the gospel, right? Oh, hi, come. Okay, bye. Right. If it's not good news, it's not the gospel. When I start to see that biblical law is used to oppress, I begin to question and I want to go deeper. So the goal is to keep the law life-giving. If it stops being life-giving, then we have a duty to interpret. That's how the biblical writers thought, right? And then rabbinic and so forth. So you don't just change, right? So you can do whatever you want, right? You want to make sure that whatever you're changing is life-giving and not furthering oppression, right? So if we start to say pedophilia is okay, then we're looking, some people oppressed even more now, right? So the idea is to always go back because the main ethos of the text, the spirit of the text is redemption, right? So in the light of that spirit, we interpret. But we can't go against the spirit of the text, right? We can go against the letter, but we can't go against the spirit. Make sense? Yeah. So that's the idea. So you can see now, right? I think how the biblical text is going, right? Exclusion is something that is more of a human construct, and the spirit of the text goes towards inclusion. Just to now respond to for Romans 1, right? No, it's very brief.
Okay.
It's simply, the text is addressed to married heterosexual men
Yeah.
and telling them, basically the issue is that there's the issue of adultery, right? But there's also the issue of not wanting to have limitation. The Roman context at the time, if you've read, the Symposium, Plato's Symposium, was really a context where there were no limitations placed on sexuality, right? So then you could do anything, right? So the issue in Romans is basically saying, right, you want to live, actually, let's read it. Let me go there just to make sure. So Romans 1:26. But I think, yeah, the issue there has much more to do with the absence of limitations placed on sexuality, the absence of monogamy than on the, but let's take a look.
I take it as like anything, like you'll be limitless, but then you'll realize that you have to turn back to faith, which is God. That's what I kind of think.
Let's see, because of this, God gave them over to their shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Okay, so here, see, We're talking about heterosexual men who want more, right? That's the problem, right? This is not talking about, it's talking about any type of promiscuous culture, right? Which is where you don't want the limit of one partner, you don't want limits set on. So because the target audience is heterosexual men, right, who had women, and now they want everything, right? It has to do more with greed, absence of limitation, which we saw as a problem. Remember in the Garden of Eden, the tree is there to remind us, can't have it all. You can't do everything. Otherwise it's chaos, right? It's chaos, forces of chaos come back in. So I think that's here not dealing with, remember that the natural state is defined as heterosexual. So if you're natural heterosexual and now you're trying sex with all kinds of things, there's a problem according to the text, especially if you're married, right? So that's, I think, the emphasis here, more because there's not really any, we have a deeper analysis here in that text, right? So that's how I answer that text. Does that make sense? Yeah, yeah. Okay. Any questions? Anything?
Like, what you said, it's interpreting that heterosexual men shouldn't.
So it's heterosexual men, right? So this is not about people who have same-sex attraction. This is about people who are married, have heterosexual, but they want, like you were saying, the mind of the man. They want to try everything, right? And they don't want to set limits on their sexuality, and that's seen as dangerous, right? First of all, you lose the commitment to one person, which is monogamy, which is monotheism, right? But then you also don't accept limits, and that in itself is dangerous. That's the beginning of chaos, right? That's when the forces of chaos. Remember the story of the flood, right? The men didn't want limits, they murdered. And then the flood, right? So this is the idea here. And I think in Romans, he also says, you guys are like the generation of the flood, right? That behavior, which is not accepting your limits, taking whatever you want, that's gonna allow the forces of chaos to seep back in, right? And that's the problem here, right? Okay, great. Any last questions? Whoever needs to go can go. I'm gonna turn off the recording. Whoever wants to stay and discuss, you can.
Thank you.
You're welcome.